Hello, our truth warriors. Today's guest is the man dedicated to precious metals. He knows its main uses and the true values of protecting yourself by holding diversified asset classes. There is one thing I would like to focus on here today, and that is my favorite thing, and that is silver. I couldn't think of anyone better to talk to with us about this wonderful commodity, and that he is the driving force behind Miles Franklin, the very knowledgeable Andy Schectman. Hello, sir, and welcome to
Chris,
the
thank you,
program.
brother. I appreciate that kind introduction, my man, and it's an honor to be here with you. Nice to meet you, albeit over the internet, but thanks for having me, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
No, it's an absolute pleasure, and thank you very much for coming on. Andy, can you please tell us your story of how you got to where you are with one of, if not the biggest suppliers of silver, gold, and other precious metals in North America?
I guess you could say, Chris, we're the embodiment of the American dream. As as trite as that sounds, my father and I would represent the least likely cast of characters to achieve what we did. In 1989, my father and I, on a wing and a prayer, started this company. He sold his life insurance policies, he and my mother. His middle name is Miles. Borrowed $60,000 from his best friend from high school, whose middle name was Franklin. And in a one-room office the size of a closet before the internet, we started this company. Um, Somehow, by the grace of God, by hard work, here we are almost 35 years later. We've uh, done over 10 billion in sales. We've never had a customer complaint ever. And it's a testament to this country, the opportunities that it gave me. And that's, as we were talking offline, kind of been one of the things in the back of my mind over the last several years that's really been driving me to get this information out to the public. The erosion of many of the principles of this country are something that I feel very strongly about. And the opportunities that this country afforded me is something that I feel blessed about every single day. So, there are a lot of people around me in my life that are incredibly well read, family members even, but it just seems that they're reading the wrong information and they're not getting the truth as to what's happening. And so over the last 3 or 4 years, YouTube has changed my life. I spend 3 or 4 hours a day, every day, 7 days a week, scouring the planet for information,
Yeah.
information that we're not finding here in this country. And so it's kind of been my mission to help people get out of the way of what they don't see coming,
Yeah.
because you can't get out of the way of what you don't see coming unless you have the opportunity to at least make an educated appraisal of said information. And so that's where I am here today. Someone who humbly thanks God every day for being born in this country and for the opportunities that it afforded me. And now trying my darndest to help as many people as I can see information that, for whatever reason, is not readily available to us by watching the mainstream or following the mainstream narrative. And that's why I like coming on shows like yours in order to help spread the truth the way that you are, um, unbiased and hopefully helping people little by little.
Yeah, absolutely. And as that window of opportunity closes for many, it seems to become more apparent every day. Now, why is silver so important as an industrial metal? And why and where will we see this being used now and in the future?
Well, it's interesting. Everyone talks about silver's use in industry, and I understand that. I mean, when you talk about conductivity, there's nothing like it. So yes, it's used in industry, in green and in digital applications, and expanding, of course. It's used in solar panels, photovoltaics, as it's called, and that's an expanding area, of course. It's experienced a monetary renaissance. These areas of demand, this plurality in demand is very unusual to a commodity which usually have single sources of demand. one of the things that I find very, very interesting that is omitted quite frequently with silver is its use in the military industrial complex. If you'll indulge me for just a moment, um, I have for a very long time talked about the um, uses of silver in military applications. I just recently gave a presentation at Rick Rule's conference in Boca, and I'll actually pull up the actual number of the law, or it's not a law. It was a subcommittee hearing that I mentioned. It's subcommittee hearing in 1942, S.2768. If people were to look it up, S.2768. It was a subcommittee of the Committee on Banking and Currency, United States Senate. 77th Congress, second session on S.2768, a bill to authorize the use for war purposes of silver held or owned by the United States. I just want to read something to you and kind of draw the narrative here, because I think it's very interesting. To me, this is a smoking gun. Yeah. This is why silver is not performing the way that I believe it should be. This is directly from this bill, which you can pull up on the internet. The present consumption of silver for war purposes is at the rate of about 100 million ounces per year and is growing rapidly. According to the War Production Board, it is only a matter of months before war demands will have increased sufficiently to require at least 200 million ounces of silver per year. All right, so that's 1942. And I gave a presentation 2 years ago in Vancouver at the Vancouver Resource Investment Conference. It's one of the only two conferences that I attend each year. Jay Martin, it's a heck of a conference for your listeners out there, especially those up north in Canada. It's one that I strongly suggest people attend. In any case, my research had led me to believe that there was approximately 500 ounces of silver in the tip of every Tomahawk cruise missile. And I said that in a presentation at VRIC. And as I walked off the stage, talking with people, asking me questions about the presentation, a man was waiting patiently and came up to me, tapped me on the shoulder, and he said, "You know, Andy, I work for the Department of Defense, and I actually helped design the Tomahawk cruise missile. And I know there's a little bit of silver in it, but I'm not sure you're right on that. Let me get back to you." Sure, I said, great. Didn't hear from him again till this year when I spoke. It's up in January. And I gave a presentation, and he came back up to me again. He was waiting patiently with a stack of pictures in his hands. And he says, "I'll be damned, Andy. Do you remember me?" He says, "I'll be damned. You were right. There's between 13 and 14 kilograms of silver in the tip of a Tomahawk." He said, "See, I helped design it." And he said, "These are all declassified photos I'm showing you." He said, "Our biggest challenge was getting the missile to launch vertically instead of out of the tube of a torpedo tube of a submarine. And here's where we had it on a platform and off the coast of California, launching it and this and that." He says, "But you're right. There is between 13 and 14 kilograms in the tip of a Tomahawk."
Wow.
And so as we go forward, I want you to understand that there is no question in my mind that when we talk about silver's use in military, not only was it talked about in 1942 to the use of 200 million ounces, but the technology backing the sophisticated weaponry and aerospace is without question far more sophisticated than it was in 1942. And so the need for silver is there. Now, here comes the smoking gun. When we take a look at the Silver Institute, the institute that publishes the silver supply and demand fundamentals, we're told there's a 260 million ounce shortfall again last year between supply and demand. But here are the numbers that they give us, all right? And I want you to tell me what's missing. Industrial demand, 9%. Electrical and electronics, 9%, of which photovoltaics, solar panels, 20%. Brazing alloy and solders, 3%. Other industrial, 9%. Photography, -3%. Jewelry, 4%, and silverware, 7%. Do we notice something missing in the Silver Institute supply-demand fundamentals? They are not speaking about the military applications. Now, the last piece of the puzzle is what's happening right now on COMEX and the LBMA. And I don't mean to deviate so far from your question, But
No,
I
it's good.
want it to be understood that, yes, everyone focuses on the industrial applications for silver and the monetary applications, both of which I believe are incredibly important. That duality of demand, but the plurality to me comes here. And that is the fact that silver is needed copiously by the military industrial complex, who seems to be the puppet master, seems to be pulling the strings on so many levels, the elite of the elite, if you will. And I want people to think about this for a moment. There is, now I'm wondering, can I show you, can I share my screen with you by chance? Is that
It's
possible?
already on ready for you.
All right, so let me do it this way. Can you see that?
I certainly can.
This is a presentation that I made. So, uh, and since I'm doing it this way, let's go back. Here is the smoking gun. There is the subcommittee hearing. Here is the supply demand numbers: industrial, electrical, electronics, photovoltaics, brazing, alloy and solders, other industrial, photography, jewelry, etc. But here's something that I think people need to understand, right? Here is a snapshot of the COMEX right now. The red line represents the four biggest bullion banks. The green line here represents the eight biggest bullion banks that are tied together. So the top four could be, like, let's just say, a Standard Chartered Bank, Deutsche Bank, JP Morgan, HSBC. The eight would be, let's add on Bank of America, Citi, Goldman, and another. So they're the eight big commercial banks in the West. Do we notice something unusual here? This is the largest concentrated short position in any commodity ever traded in the history of the COMEX market. Why the hell would eight Western bullion banks be stepping on the price of silver to this degree? More so than any commodity that is traded on the COMEX. It's interesting that the top four are all precious metals, right? We keep hearing about how copper is such a big deal. Look at copper right here. Look at oil right way down here. So when we talk about eight banks, Western banks, in an environment where countries like India are buying 700 million ounces of silver over the last 3 years, doubling the amount they bought last year in the first 4 months of this year. When we see reports that China is buying up all of the doré and the silver concentrate unrefined from Latin America over the last several months, paying way more than the West will pay, the rest of the world is accumulating silver hand over fist, using the suppression of the Western markets to do so. Why the hell are eight banks short to the degree of the largest short position in the history of the COMEX market? And it is because, in my opinion, the military industrial complex needs it for all of these high-tech weapons that they are building and sending across the globe. But at the same time, as you can see this right here, this is the LBMA. This is the lowest level of silver they've had in their vault since they started keeping records, only 800 million ounces, right? And of that 800 million ounces, because the rest of the world is beating us at this game, right? They understand what we're doing. They know what we're doing. The BRICS grain exchange just came about, and the head of the new BRICS grain exchange said, you know, we produce all the wheat way more than the West does, and yet we can't control the prices. It's controlled on COMEX. They understand what we're doing with all of the world's commodities. And so here you can see at this giant ski slope, they are draining the Western vaults, standing for delivery in an effort to beat us at our own game. And that's how they will do it, because over the years, they have never been coordinated enough, sophisticated enough, wealthy enough, or desired enough to drain the vaults. This is the back door. This is a way they can beat us without firing a single bullet. And of these 800 million ounces, I'll stop sharing my screen here. Of the 800 million ounces that the LBMA currently holds, Chris, they tell us that only 300 million are unencumbered. 500 million belong to the ETFs. But here's the interesting thing. The LBMA admits to trading 292 million ounces of silver per day, right? Per day. Yet they tell us that those numbers are 10 times understated, because they only show the final settlement numbers, not all of the trades that it took to get there, which would then basically say that they're trading 2.9 billion ounces of silver per day at 10 times the 292 million. That's 3.5 times annual global mine supply. And what that would tell you is that if there's only 300 million ounces available, yet they're trading up to 3 billion, It is a scam. It is a Bernie Madoff scam, just like it is on the COMEX, where right now silver is about 1,600% rehypothecated, meaning 16 people own the same contract. They think it's just theirs. And if everyone stands for delivery, if the whole system doesn't break, 15 will get cash. At one, if they're lucky, will get the metal. So what I am trying to say to you is this: remember how those 8 banks control the largest short position in the history of the COMEX market. Why? It's not so they can make solar panels. It's not so that they can make electronics. It's because the military industrial complex is as powerful of an entity as there is on the planet, and they need to make war. And the only way you can make high-tech weaponry is to make sure that silver is abundant. The only way you can do that is to misdirect the world into thinking silver is an archaic relic and no reason to buy it, when at the same time, the biggest money in the world, the Chinese and the Indians and the rest of the BRICS countries, see it for what it is and are using this suppression to drain the Western vaults. And remember when I said earlier, there's a lot of very smart, well-read people just reading the wrong stuff. So if you thought as an analyst you were trying to figure out what's going on with silver, and you look at the supply-demand numbers that come out of the Silver Institute, you'd say, well, geez, I don't see I don't see any reason why to think silver would be in deficit or scarce, because, well, here are the numbers. Well, let's add another, I don't know how many hundreds of millions of ounces needed. If there's 500 ounces in the tip of a Tomahawk, think of all the missiles they're sending all around the world. All of these high-tech missiles, all of these, the stealth bombers and the F-16s, they all need silver, all of them.
Yeah.
And so in an effort to continue to keep the military industrial complex flush, they need to step on the price of silver. And I will tell you, the only way, as Jim Sinclair used to say, that this game ends is by delivery, is by a default on the exchanges. And it would appear to me that we've never been closer, ever, to that moment happening, as the rest of the world finally understands this is the Achilles heel of the West.
That's it. I mean, the price of silver's been rigged for at least 25 years that I'm aware of. Deutsche Bank, Scotiabank, HSBC have all played their part in this. And I remember them getting caught and getting the slap on the wrist. And obviously, they wrote a check out for whatever fine it was out of money that they created from thin air. But when I look at this, are they still rigging the prices in the markets now for this very reason that you just mentioned with the military industrial complex?
100%. Absolutely, they are. And there's no question in my mind that they are. And they're doing so. If you look at the COMEX market, just recently, we saw the largest short position maybe that I've ever seen in silver and gold over the last last 2 months. We've seen a massive short position in silver. Now, just recently, that short position in silver, we haven't seen the commitment of traders report that comes out today, but just last week, let me give you the exact numbers. Last week, the numbers showed that they covered, or that they drove it down so much, fleecing the managed money to where they covered, give me 1 second. The answer is yes, they absolutely are, but I did write those numbers down. Where did I put them? I'm sorry. Yes, they are 100%. I'll see if I can find the numbers from last week's Commitment of Traders report, which, what did I do with that? Hang on, I will show you. Apologize, not prepared enough
No, it's
yet.
all good. It's all good. And like the whole because like for years I could never really wrap my head around why
Yes.
the metals were suppressed. But
Yeah, so the Commander Traders report showed again the managed money crowd was fleeced. The silver longs sold 1.7 billion in long futures last week, and the gold longs 4.488 billion in long futures. So that's the managed money. When the managed money sells 1.7 billion in long silver futures, that means the commercial bank takes the other side of it. They go
yeah,
long. And so the commercial banks, what they have been doing for all of these years, Chris, is they suck in the speculation. They absorb the buying pressure. They allow the managed money to drive the price up, to become optimistic, to push them above moving averages. and they absorb all of that buying pressure. And when the buying pressure subsides, then they step on the price. What they do is very unusual. The commercial banks in silver and gold short a rising market. That's usually very dangerous. Shorts are typically done on a falling market, pile on like GameStop and AMC.
Yeah.
To short a rising market, you better have one big ass checkbook, and you better be very fearless because you can lose unlimited. And that's exactly what they do in a coordinated fashion. The commercial banks step on the price of silver and drive it down, and the managed money capitulates. They sell, they cough it up, and it's been rinse, wash, and repeat like this forever. But why this will end is what we are seeing, where, like I said, India bought more silver in the first 4 months, and they're the largest silver purchaser in the world, and they bought more in the first 4 months of this year than they did in all of last year. They bought 1.5 times the amount of gold in the first 4 months of this year than they did all of last year, which is a record year. And in both cases, they are repatriating it. They are bringing it home, along with the 100 metric tons of gold they've held at the Bank of England since 1991. They are removing all counterparty risk. We've seen a tremendous repatriation effort by over 30 nations from the Bank of England and the New York Fed. The Western system of rule of law is being questioned, and so too is the safety and wisdom of leaving money in countries whereby assets can be sanctioned, frozen, and or, let's call it what it is, stolen. As we look at the Russian assets, where $5 billion has been stolen in the United States in Russian assets in U.S. treasuries, and worse yet, used to fund a war in the Ukraine. Who are they funneling it through? Oh yeah, the military-industrial complex, to build weapons to give to the country Russia is in a war against. That's a line you don't come back from. So the rest of the world is saying, you know, we don't trust them anymore, and if we don't align ideologically, they'll take it from us. And so I believe this is a drive to accumulate the world's commodities. And that's exactly what we are seeing by the draining of the exchanges and the copious acquisition of gold and silver, using this brain dead policy of the Western commercial banks to suppress the price of gold and silver. For most of my career, Chris, no one stood for delivery, less than 1% of the contracts. But now you see huge delivery requests in gold and silver off of the COMEX and the LBMA, draining it little by little by little by little, not too fast to cut off anyone's nose to spite their face, but slow enough to methodically corner the world's supply of all commodities. And it's not just precious metals. Heck, the Chinese bought the London Metals Exchange not too long ago. That's all the base metals. And now they're building warehouses in Beijing to stockpile the metal that is traded in London on the LME, which they own. Their Belt Road Initiative is 155 countries, 75% of human population, and all of the countries that they are working with cooperatively are massively resource rich, building roads and bridges and maritime channels and railways and oil and gas rigs and gold and silver mines and refineries and all of these things to industrialize these countries that are resource rich, that have not been industrialized, and having a piece of the pie, as is all of the countries that are applying to the BRICS. They're all massively resource rich. And as Zoltan Pozsar puts it, the brilliant man who used to work at the New York Fed, who now works at UBS, he understands the plumbing of the system better than anyone, that this is Breton Woods 3. Breton Woods 1, when the dollar took over for the pound sterling at the end of World War II. Breton Woods 2, when we became, and that would be loosely, it wasn't actually defined, but that would be when we became the petrodollar. And as you know, I'm sure the Saudis decided to not sign the exclusivity deal here just a few weeks ago, which was the 50th anniversary, saying we're going to buy oil from other countries or sell oil to other countries and other currencies as well. And he says, now we're in Breton Woods 3. He or she who owns the commodities win. And that is exactly what these countries are doing. And they are using the suppression that we create, the leverage of naked suppression, where in the LBMA, you can trade 3 billion ounces of silver per day, 3.5 times global mine supply, when you only have 300 million ounces backing those trades. That's a problem. And the way that the countries that are now industrialized, coordinated, incentivized and wealthy enough to stand for delivery are doing so. And it is the Achilles heel of the West. That is why I believe it will end. And one of these days, when the commercial banks fool the managed money like they're doing right now into going short and into selling their longs, when the managed money goes short, that means that commercials are going long. And when the managed money sells their longs, they sell them to the commercials. So the commercial banks, which are at the tip of the spear in terms of information and funding, and probably being given a green light when you look at JP Morgan, who paid a $920 million fine for manipulating the silver market. I know their head trader. I had lunch with them once. Michael Nowak, he's in prison for doing this a couple of years ago. The biggest fine they've ever charged anyone. You mentioned fines. Well,
Yeah.
they're still allowed to be the administrator of the world's largest silver trust, SLV. And 2 years ago, they paid that largest fine ever, $920 million. Their trading desk for metals, JP Morgan's trading desk, made $1 billion. So they paid 920. They walked away up $80 million. Yeah, they got a 2-year jail sentence for their head trader and a couple of other traders and slap on the wrist. And they probably said, when you get out, Michael, there'll be a big cherry on the sundae waiting for you, because here they are, still being the administrator of the world's largest silver trust, and they're the biggest manipulators of the metals market, maybe only second to HSBC Bank, who is behind GLD. So when
Yeah.
you talk about the Western concerted effort to suppress the price of metals, it's much deeper than it seems. Yes, it's the military-industrial complex on one end for silver, but it's also an illusion of maintaining bond superiority and Western currency superiority, in particular the dollar, by stepping on gold. And so all manipulations end badly. And you can only manipulate a market, Chris, over a long period of time by pushing it in the direction that it is going. And the rest of the world, where the central banks have bought more gold over the last 2.5 years than at any time in central bank history, over 100 years. And now you see all of the silver being drained to the
Yeah.
lowest level in the history of the LBMA. Yeah, they know what we're doing, and they're beating us in our own game. It's ninjutsu, where you beat your opponent by using their leverage against them, and
Yeah.
that's what's happening to us right now. We are being beaten by our own leverage. So yes, absolutely, brother, they are still manipulating it.
Yeah, looking at those charts that we had there on the physical availability of silver and listening to the numbers that you mentioned there about the amount that India has been buying. If India continue to buy at that rate, would they not exhaust the physical availability of silver on the planet? Would it disappear?
Absolutely. And something just happened in India that bears mentioning. It's incredibly bullish. So India, over the last couple of years, has imported, as I mentioned, pretty damn well near, sorry, I guess I haven't had my coffee yet, damn well near 700 million ounces of silver, and from the West. And that's right now, there's about 50, 60 million ounces in the registered category on COMEX, and there's only 300 million ounces that are available off LBMA. So you're, almost 2.5 times what is available in London, and almost 10 times over, 11 times over what is available on COMEX. And so they, last 2 years ago, they bought roughly somewhere in the neighborhood of just a couple $1 million worth of silver from the United Arab Emirates. But last year they bought over $1 billion worth, because they had a treaty in place that allowed them to have their import duties slashed in half if they bought from things from the United Arab Emirates. So they routed a lot of the silver through the United Arab Emirates. And by the way, in Q1 2024, the Reserve Bank of India bought more silver in the first 4 months of the year than they did all of last year, 2023, which was a record year for them from the West. But what is really interesting is just last week, we saw that Indian government slashed their import tariffs across the board, because they were trying to step on the black market. That it's like drugs, you make drugs illegal, people still find it.
Yeah.
And so it's the same thing here. There's a huge black market in India for gold and silver. And so the import duty typically is 15%, Chris. They slashed it to 6%. And so it's hugely bullish for gold and silver, the prices moving forward, because, like for India and like the rest of these countries, gold and silver represent wealth and strategic wealth, whether it be industrial or military or what not, but it's disappearing in nature. And that's the important thing. They understand that it's becoming harder and harder and harder and harder to find silver, in the respect that you have a mining ratio right now of roughly 7-to-1, meaning 7 ounces of gold for every, or 7 ounces of silver for every 1 ounce of gold. For 5,000 years, it was 16-to-1. And because it's found in nature in a form called epithermal, very near the surface, well, the big deposits were found decades ago. And so I think they understand that, look, of all the silver that was mined last year, only just under 30% of it came from silver companies. The rest was a byproduct of companies stumbling across it as they were mining other material. Right. So when you talk about an asset that is depleting in nature and is accelerating in its uses in green and digital and military applications, let alone a whole generation of people who have woken up to its monetary uses, it should be considered a strategic metal, not an industrial metal. In fact, there were several companies and banks and mining companies that went to the Canadian government this year petitioning for the Canadian government to reclassify silver from industrial to strategic. And indeed it is. And I think countries like India and China realize that.
Yeah. I mean, China has been advising its citizens to buy silver and gold, and this has been causing absolutely enormous lineups for the citizens trying to obtain the precious metals. Why would the Chinese government advise this? And why are we not hearing this from other governments around the world for the people in their countries?
The Chinese have it in their DNA. They've been accumulating it now, for I don't know how many thousands of years, or I mean, they've been buying it forever since the beginning. The gold and silver have been cornerstone to their heritage. China understands what's happening. You see, China does things in a way that the rest of the world doesn't. They do it in a very methodical way. If I admire anything about the way they do it, they think in terms of decades. We think in terms of minutes here in the West. But indeed, they have been incentivizing their people to accumulate gold and silver. There's a man named Alistair MacLeod. I happen to think he's the smartest man in the industry. And he talks about China owning as much as 40,000 metric tons of gold, which would be pretty damn close to 16 or 17 or 18 times what they want the world to believe. That they have as much as 18,000 held by the people, and as much as 22,000 metric tons held by the state. And they've been producing between 400 and 500 metric tons of gold per year for the last 25 years, yet they tell the world they only have 2,600 metric tons, which is a lie. My whole career, I've been doing this for 34 years, Chris. I've pretty much been around the block longer than most people in this industry. And I can go way back and remember everyone always saying they're lying about their numbers. They're lying about their numbers. They're lying about their numbers, because China showed like 1,200 metric tons forever and it never increased. And they were the biggest producers in the world, not to mention the biggest accumulators. And then over the last 18 months, we've seen 18 months in a row of them showing increase of their gold acquisition, and then they stop for 2 months, and the whole world says, look, they've stopped. No, they haven't stopped. They've been buying it nonstop through, for example, their commercial banks that work as a proxy for the PBOC, the People's Bank of China, and they don't report that to the IMF. Or when these commercial banks deal with the refineries in South Africa and Switzerland, they don't report that to the IMF. When they produce 400 to 500 metric tons of gold per year, they massively understate what they are producing. And when you talk about the fact that when they buy gold under 995 pure, they don't report that to the IMF. There's no reason for these countries to report these numbers any more than it is for the West to acquiesce how much gold we have at Fort Knox, when Ron Paul has asked twice to have that audited and it's been turned down. Why? It's the people's gold. We supposedly have more than anyone in the world at 8,300 metric tons. Why not disclose that? Why would China want to be forthright about how much they have? Just their their production alone outpaces what they say they have. And I believe there's a reason for that. I believe that gold will be the cornerstone of a new system.
Yeah.
I've talked a lot about that. I know this conversation is about silver, but the same thing is true with silver. They believe, and I think this is right, Zoltan Pozsar is right. We went from a system of opaque debt instruments, that being US treasuries, that were considered an asset. I mean, if you think about the historical precedent of a country's debt being considered an asset, it's a sliver this big. But gold and silver represent 5,000 years worth of it. But it's not just gold and silver. Breton Woods 3 would say he or she who's got the commodities wins. And I think that's where we are going as the world moves away from opaque debt promises that can be weaponized and or confiscated if we do not align ideologically into what it takes to be a strong, stable nation. And that is who's got all of the commodities needed to do that. That's what they are doing slowly and methodically. And they're imploring their people to do the same thing. So why don't other nations? I don't know. In fact, the United States does everything to inhibit their people from seeing the truth and accumulating metal, because what gold is, they want us to believe gold and silver are commodities. They're not. I mean, they are. This goes back to the duality again. Sure, they are a commodity, but they are wealth. And gold and silver have been wealth for 5,000 years. I don't sell them, Chris, to anyone to get wealthy. You own enough of it, you will be, because it is wealth. But what gold and silver represent to me is wealth outside the system that has outlived 2 world wars, German hyperinflation, the Great Depression, every pandemic, everything the world has ever attempted to throw at it. And here we are 5,000 years after they were both mentioned in the Bible. I don't know how many hundreds of times. And the most well-funded and, more importantly, well-informed traders on the globe, those that know the playbook, are doing all they can to quietly, using the Western suppression of the paper markets, where the silver market can trade 3 billion ounces a day, 3.5 times global mine supply in London, where on COMEX it can be rehypothecated 1,600%. They're doing all they can to use that cover of the Western brain-dead policy of suppression of commodities to make our system seem stronger than it is. They're using that leverage against us, just like you do in jiu-jitsu. And I think that they're very cunning in the way that they do this. And the fact that the West is letting this happen, completely ignoring it or completely not talking about it, whether or not they notice it or not, I'm sure they do. It will be a big mistake talked about in the history books moving forward.
Yeah. Now, a lot of people have purchased futures and paper derivatives of silver and precious metals. They're never going to see the metal itself. But how can these paper derivatives actually affect and control the price of physical metals?
Well, they offer example pretty much like 35 times leverage right now in gold. I'll give you an example. I use futures the way that the futures market was designed to be used, whereby I have to hedge my exposure. A 100-ounce gold contract right now will cost me about $7,000-ish, $7,500, $8,000. I haven't looked recently, but I don't do it. My head traders do. I could ask them, but between $7,000 and $8,000 will control a 100-ounce gold contract. And so if you realize the leverage that that creates, it's one thing if I have 1,000 ounces of gold in my warehouse, which is quite common, and the price of gold goes down by $100, I'm down $100,000. So if I have 1,000 ounces in my warehouse, I will sell 1,000 ounces on COMEX. So if the price goes down on my holdings, it goes up commensurate on COMEX. And so I'm market neutral at all times. That's a covered short position. But if I am a commercial bank with untold amounts of money and backing by the federal government and a collusive, think of the 8 banks that are short, the largest concentrated short position in the history of the COMEX in any commodity. If me and my buddies are collusive in our short positions with unlimited money and kind of the wink, wink from the powers that be, because it's needed for the the safety of the country and the military industrial complex, go ahead and do it. The overwhelming of the system where we can rehypothecate silver 1,600%, where we can trade 3.5 times annual global mine supply every day, even though we have 10 times less silver backing those trades than are made. That's all a paper derivative. It's the paper derivative controlling the price. It's the tail wagging the dog. The underlying commodity should control the price. Instead, it is the 35 times leverage by the wealthiest, most collusive, coordinated group of traders on the planet that are holding the price down. So it's one thing, it's very dangerous for you or me to go naked short, because if we don't have what it is that if we have to deliver and come up with that product, good luck. You can lose unlimited. Anyway, so the bottom line is it's a situation where right now you have massive leverage being controlled by big, powerful banks with a Western agenda. And it's been that way for a long time. And frankly, we had the ability to do that for a long time. And one could argue that that is something that is going by the wayside.
Yeah. Now, for private individuals out there, why is it that silver should be held personally by I see it as a great hedge and a wealth protector, but what reasons would you tell people out there that they should own silver, gold, and precious metals to protect themselves?
Because to me, silver and gold are wealth. Silver and gold are wealth outside the system. Silver and gold are being accumulated by the most well-informed traders on the globe. This is a period of time where counterparty risk is huge. Just, go read The Great Taking by David Rogers Webb, and you'll understand how big counterparty risk truly is. Gold and silver to me are not investments. There's something I hope I never need to use. If I do, I'm damn glad I have it. If not, I give it to my children or my grandchildren or to a charity or to my nieces or my nephews or whatever. And I know that in the year 3000, long after the dollar bills in my wallet are hanging from a frame in the Smithsonian as an example of what used to be, gold and silver will still be wealth. And so I really, truly, honestly believe that gold will be part of a new system. I've talked a lot about the BRICS. I know that's not what we're talking about here today, but they just came out and announced in principle a new settlement currency called the unit, which will be backed 40% by gold. You can see by the acquisitions by these huge central banks who know the playbook, who understand where we're going, that it's about commodities and really nothing else where we are going. And that's why Zoltan Pozsar calls this Breton Woods 3, a system that's all about transparency, which to me is blockchain, and commodities backing that transparency, and that is gold and silver and things that are needed. Now, silver won't have, in my opinion, the role that gold will, but there is a 95% correlation in movement throughout all of history between the two. As one goes, so too will the other. Silver is wealth, silver is money, but it also might be one of the most important industrial commodities in the world. And that duality in demand makes it, in my opinion, the most intriguing investment in the world. And I highlight with quotations investment because I don't like to say investment. To me, it's wealth, but I would be lying if I said anything other than that it's a hell of an investment.
Yeah. And when we consider the ratio, is silver still massively undervalued against gold?
Yeah, it's historically undervalued at 85 to 1. It's an anomaly. In a historical sense of the word, it's 4 feet of snow in Death Valley in July. I mean, it just doesn't happen. I live on the first tee box of a golf course in southern Florida. I spent most of my life in Minnesota. I moved here 3 years ago. I have 2 snowmobiles in my sister's garage. If I woke up this morning here, August 1st, to 4 feet of snow on the tee box in my backyard where it's probably 90 degrees today, if I woke up to 4 feet of snow, I wouldn't call my sister and say, hey, send me down my snowmobiles, because I would know it's an anomaly. Any more so, any more so than I think what we are seeing with an 85 to 1 ratio. It represents roughly, I don't know, less than 1%, probably a half or a quarter of a percent of the time over the last 100 years that we've seen anything like this. So it's a historical anomaly, both in terms of price and also geological ratio. It's just way out of whack because it's coming out of the ground at 7 to 1. So God's ratio is 7-1. Man's ratio is 85-1. And that 85-1 ratio is because of those 8 idiot banks that are holding down the price for an agenda. You cannot do that when the whole world is working against you in terms of accumulation. You could for the last 50 years when the West ruled the roost, when they had the Western coordination, sophistication, and wealth to do this, to maintain this illusion. But that illusion is now being challenged by the Southern Hemisphere, who is for the first time wealthy, coordinated, and sophisticated, and motivated. And they understand this is how they win the game, by slowly beating us at our own game, by bleeding dry the exchanges. That will be to the benefit of the people that have physically held gold and silver, which are assets that are not simultaneously someone else's liability. There's no counterparty risk there, which is the icing on the cake. In a world filled with counterparty and systemic risk, I think it's very important to understand and realize the benefits of physical possession at this stage of the game.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's take a very possible future event, and that is the crashing of the financial markets from what I see being a monster debt bubble. And at this point, people will lose all their cash from the financial establishments under the bailout system. How at this point is holding physical silver beneficial?
Well, let me stop you right there. The bailout system's dead, my friend. There is no more bailout system. The Dodd-Frank Act said bailouts are illegal. From this point forward, it will be bail-ins, and no one even knows that. You know, part of the reason they don't know that is when Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank failed, they were bailed out. And there was a subcommittee meeting, Republican subcommittee hearing on this, where the Republican senator from Oklahoma said, Madam Secretary, to Janet Yellen, you just bailed out Silicon and Signature banks. The Dodd-Frank Act that was written in 2009 said that after the great financial crisis and the bailout of all of these banks, that bailouts were made illegal. And she said, yes, sir, you're right. That is the case. We did indeed bail them out, but it was an uber majority vote between the FOMC, which is the Federal Reserve, the FDIC, myself, and the president. And we decided that these banks were too systemic. They could potentially bring down the entire system. So we made a majority vote to bail out these banks, but it will not come at the expense of the taxpayer. I'm thinking, yeah, right. FDIC will cover it, right? And so he said, well, that's understandable, Madam Secretary, but does that mean if a bank fails in Oklahoma, a regional bank, my constituents will be made whole? And she says, no, sir, that is not the case. It would require a majority vote again by the FOMC, the FDIC, myself, and the president. In order for that to happen, those banks will be bailed in. And the bail-in legislation says that anything over the FDIC limit of $250,000 would be bailed in. You lose it, you are an unsecured general creditor, i.e. last to be paid. That money will go into the bank, into the kitty, and it will be used to bail in the bank instead of the taxpayers. So FDIC itself is a scam where there is 240 billion or 140 billion in assets backing 18 trillion in deposits, less than 1%. So yes, when we talk about the risks in the system, people don't even know how big the risks are because the other banks that have failed subsequently have been gobbled up by JP Morgan or a few of the other big regional banks. You wait and see when there is a bail-in. And people who have no idea, who are well-read and sophisticated, just reading the wrong stuff, say, my God, did you see our neighbor? He lost everything. He had $3 million in the bank, and he only got the FDIC limit, which, by the way, if you read the Dodd-Frank law on it, the FDIC has 4 years to make you whole on the FDIC limit. That's 250 grand. Everything else, you'll get back shares of a bank that is, in essence, defunct. So, and who's going to, if you get those shares, the first thing you're going to do is sell them so you can get money because you've been screwed, right? Well, how fast are those shares going to collapse? It's a very, very fragile ecosystem. And I don't think anyone has any idea just how fragile it really is.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely incredible. I remember reading in 2013 the Bail-in Act in Canada, page 144. I distinctly remember where it was even put on paper because I read it and I read it again and I'm like, I don't believe what I'm seeing here. And again, I've been trying to warn people about the bail-in for a very long time now. Now, you mentioned the FDIC there. The FDIC currently have a list of, I think it's around 63 problem banks on there. I wrote to the FDIC to ask if they could give me that, and they said no because it comes from camels, and they don't have any way of releasing that through their business. They clearly have the names of these banks. Now, I wonder whether, through the power of social media, the power of this podcast today and your viewers, I know a few savvy people out there who have the ability to put in freedom of information requests to government organizations. Last time I looked at the FDIC website, it was fdic.gov. Now, if enough people wrote to the FDIC asking for them to release under a freedom of information request those problem banks, do you think they would?
By the time they release it, those banks probably will have already collapsed. And
Yeah.
you look at the FDIC, they're very, very disingenuous in the respect that there are videos you can find on YouTube where they are basically saying, and one of their meetings, I remember watching it, I don't know how long ago, a few months ago, where they were basically saying that if the public really knew how messed up the system was, there would be a run on the banks, there would be a panic. So we got to keep this stuff quiet.
Yeah.
And if they tell us there are 63 banks, there's probably a whole hell of a lot more than that that are on razor's edge. They're all massively undercapitalized and overleveraged, and a lot of that is thanks to the government, where they lowered the reserve requirements to zero. So there's a zero reserve requirement by the banks, and so when you deposit your money in the bank, you're not depositing it. You're making an unsecured loan to the bank, who then takes that money and probably buys treasuries. Short-term treasuries paying 5%. This is the same mistake they made already a few years ago, where they were loaded up on treasuries at 2%, and then the Fed raised interest rates by 500 basis points in a year, and put all of those holdings, those unrealized holdings, underwater.
Yeah.
Same thing is true here, and I think that the bottom line is that no, I don't know that we'll get that information, and high probability we'll see more consolidations and bank failures before it happens. The commercial real estate issue is what's killing. You take a look at, for example, how bad that commercial real estate problem is, Chris. The former One AT&T Center in St. Louis, Missouri, 44-story building, fourth or third tallest building in all of St. Louis, was sold for $205 million in 2006, and it just sold for $3.7 million. $3.7 million. You too can own your own skyscraper in St. Louis. And how many more? I mean, we're seeing so many of those. I just looked at some here the other day. Here's a couple of them. One is address of 400 Montgomery Street in San Francisco. It says a prime historic office building in San Francisco's financial district is expected to sell at a massive loss. The 85,000 square foot building is expected to sell for $26 million. The building last sold for $77 million in 2019. This is a 50% discount. One of Maryland's largest malls, called the White Marsh Mall, located in the northeast suburb of Baltimore, had a stunning valuation plunge of $240 million over more than a decade. The property was once valued at $320 million in 2013, now has a valuation of $80 million. And the last one here, this is just a sampling. Brookfield-owned gas company tower in downtown Los Angeles has plummeted by over $400 million in value. The skyscraper has recently valued at $214 million and was appraised at $632 million 3 years ago. This is a commercial real estate apocalypse. So how many more of these banks can absorb these kinds of losses before the whole thing starts to unwind? Yeah. Why would they have changed bailouts to bail-ins? Why are these laws on the books if they didn't understand that this was something that could potentially happen? It's very scary. And at the same time, we see Warren Buffett just sold $71 million worth of Bank of America shares. Is he concerned about the banking system? He certainly would be one of the insiders who knows what's coming. Can't say that's the case. I'm just saying, keep your eyes open, because the banks are in trouble.
Yeah, and I've heard from a couple of people when we spoke to Greg Manarino and a few other people. The people are reiterating exactly the same as what you're saying. Gerald Celente is talking about the collapse of the commercial market being possibly the pin that will burst the debt bubble, but also the fact that Bank of America is from people within the inside is in major trouble and possibly one of the biggest banks that will fall within the, probably the next, who
Well, if a
knows?
bank like Bank of America failed, they have way more in liability than the FDIC has in assets. They have trillions of dollars in derivatives.
Yeah,
And those derivatives are all tied to a counterparty. And the counterparty, of course, when you have a counterparty, Bank of America would then buy credit default swaps on the counterparty. And the credit default swaps are sold by a company like AIG. This is why AIG had to be bailed out in 2008 because of all the counterparty liability. And that's the whole premise of a derivative. Its value is based upon the counterparty's ability to make good. Well, why do you think they had to bail out Credit Suisse and UBS had to buy them? Because they were systemic. And so the systemic interwoven relationship with all of the banks and insurance companies is incredibly dangerous and could bring down the entire system.
yeah,
This is why it's never been more important to look at gold and silver for the property of being an asset with no counterparty risk. And
yeah,
I think that's one of the reasons you're seeing these governments around the world on a different level selling US treasuries and buying gold, because gold not only has doubled the performance of the 10-year treasury since 2000, it has no counterparty liability. It can't be confiscated. And I think counterparty risk is going to take on a whole different level of relevance, and that will be a very ugly word, kind of like flipping the middle finger to someone. It will be that ugly when you start to realize the amount of systemic risk in the system that can bring down the system. One domino falls and it can bring down a domino 4 miles away through the systemic chain reaction. And that's the scary part about all of this. And maybe that's not in the immediate near future. Maybe it is, don't know. But what I do know is that I think this is as dangerous of a time to not be a contrarian as we've ever lived through. I think you have a probability of being a victim if you're not a contrarian. And I think now is the time for unconventional thought, because these are indeed unconventional times, Chris.
yeah. And for those who've seen the movie The Big Short, it appears that, what we're seeing here is nothing more than a repeat, especially within the likes of the derivatives market, of what we saw back then. Would it be fair to say that the bubble of 2008 didn't completely burst? It was patched up and now has been inflated to levels that we've never seen before.
It's a joke. They should have let Mother Nature, kind of like a forest fire. It's sad, and lot of things and people or animals die. Um, but you come back a few years later and you couldn't tell it was even there. It's natural. It's what's supposed to happen. In 2008, the Federal Reserve's balance sheet was 800 billion. Last year, it was 9 trillion. It's come down a bit as they've sold off some of their assets, but they're still pretty damn close to 8 trillion. And so when you talk about what would it look like had the Fed not increased their balance sheet, i.e. buying treasuries and mortgage-backed securities to suppress interest rates and distort valuations, what would it look like if that 8 trillion plus hadn't been injected into the system? A trillion seconds ago was 31,688 years ago. This
Yeah,
is so much money people can't comprehend. And the distortions and the misallocations of resource and capital as a result of this will only make Mother Nature more pissed off when she finally gets her vengeance. And she will. You cannot run from Mother Nature.
yeah,
And it's something where I think it will end up making the ultimate end game that much more severe. So
yeah.
yeah, it should have ended then, and we should be well on our way to recovery. Instead, we've just made it worse.
I have a nice collection of framed hyperinflation notes from around the world in different countries as a reminder to me that, this can happen at any time, again, at any part of the world, regardless of how powerful people think their monetary system is. Now, at the point of rising prices of silver and gold, and based upon history repeating with events like hyperinflation, what kind of purchasing ability can you see the metals having? Because I know at the peak of the fall of the Weimar Republic. You could probably buy a house at that time for around about an ounce and a half of gold. Are we going to see the same thing with a housing collapse and the values of metals rising and people having a lot more purchasing power from holding precious metals in a collapse scenario?
I don't know. Um, the largest life insurance policy at the end of World War One during Weimar Republic was never cashed in because the postage stamp after the war was worth more in value than that largest life insurance policy. Ironically, all the gold around the world is held on central bank balance sheets in an account called the gold revaluation account. I've been talking about this for the last year. The head of the Dutch central bank keeps talking about the gold revaluation account, the gold revaluation account. Where in all of Europe it's valued at $35 an ounce. In the United States, the gold revaluation account is 42.22. So the 8,300 metric tons we have are supposedly valued at 42.22. Can't stop talking about it. I keep talking about it. Well, there was just yesterday, let me actually pull it up here real quick. There was yesterday a article that I read on CoinDesk. U.S. strategic Bitcoin reserve to be funded partially by revaluing Fed's gold, draft bill shows. And there was the officer of Senator Cynthia Loomis, who proposed the strategic reserve at the Bitcoin Nashville conference on Saturday, shared a draft of the legislation with CoinDesk. Bottom line is they talk about revaluing the gold held in the gold revaluation account. This is something a lot of people don't think about, but how could you make your balance sheet go from putrid to pristine just like that? As all of the countries around the globe, the central banks have bought more gold than at any time in the last 100 years. All of them.
Yeah.
How do you make your balance sheet immediately perfect? You revalue gold. Put it at 10,000 an ounce. James Rickard says 27,000 is his number. Put it at 10,000 an ounce, and all of a sudden your assets outweigh your liabilities.
Yeah.
And what is the one asset all central banks own? Gold. What is the name of the account that every central bank holds it in? The gold revaluation account. What did the Bank of International Settlements, the most powerful bank on the planet, say about gold in 2019? Oh, yeah, it's the only other tier one reserve asset in the world. They reclassified it from tier 3 to tier 1. Prior to that, Chris, the only other tier 1 assets were US dollars and treasuries, according to the central banks. So they reclassify tier 1. They are on a massive buying spree. And if you just Google, I found 30 countries in the last 2 years that have all repatriated their gold from the Bank of England and the New York Fed. And so, yes, I think there is a high probability that you will see gold revalued to a level that no one can imagine. Will that be done by the government or the market? I have a feeling it will be done by the government first. But to your point, I don't know how high it goes, but in an inflationary or hyperinflationary scenario, he who has the gold wins, and he who loses least wins. And I think that's one of these deals where gold and silver could represent far more than just an asset in an environment like that. And the fact that we can even talk about it tells me that it's never been more important to own it and understand those types of ramifications.
Absolutely. You mentioned the Bank of International Settlements there, and I was tracking news probably about a month ago now, where obviously Saudi had left the agreement that it had for the petrodollar, and they were looking to join the BRICS nations. And then the Bank of International Settlements had advised all the people within the BRICS nations that they should look to follow the Chinese central bank digital currency. Now, we're looking almost certainly at the central banks pulling the plug on an already failed fiat currency. And they already have the central bank digital currency in place, ready to replace it. What will this do to precious metals once that switches from fiat currency to central bank digital currency?
Well, the BIS is backing something called Project Enbridge. Project Enbridge was a joint venture between China, Hong Kong, Thailand, United Arab Emirates. It is a cross-border payment system that allows for central bank digital currencies to trade free of the interference of the Western intermediary banks or the SWIFT system. There was a meeting in Novograd, Russia, that coincided with the G7 meeting recently, The Royal Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia was invited to the G7 meeting. He turned it down. Sorry, I'm busy. But he sent his finance ministers to the meeting in Novigrad, where 59 countries have come out and said, we want to join BRICS. But more importantly, there was a meeting on the sidelines between Dilma Rousseff, Sergei Glaziev, and Putin. Sergei Glaziev is the architect of the common settlement currency and has been for 3 years for the BRICS. He's talked about a basket of currencies of the BRICS nations and a basket of commodities backing this new currency. Dilma Rousseff used to be the president of Brazil. She is now the head of the BRICS New Development Bank. That's kind of like the IMF, only for the BRICS. And she said, in principle, the three of us had a meeting on the sidelines. We have agreed to a new settlement currency, which will be traded over Project Enbridge. Now, again, Project Enbridge is being backed by the BIS. Project Enbridge is not compatible with US dollars, and Saudi Arabia just became a full participant in Project Enbridge, a full participant. The unit token, which they said they have agreed in principle to, is going to be 40% gold in kilo bars and 60% currency of the BRICS plus nations. In principle, they've agreed on it. Now, the interesting part about it, you think of all of these countries that have repatriated their gold recently, as I mentioned. I'm going to give you just a quick list of those countries. Just in a simple Google search, I pulled up the following: Germany, Austria, Slovakia, Argentina, the Netherlands, Saudi Arabia just a few weeks ago, Hungary, Belgium, Egypt just a few weeks ago, Senegal, Romania, Nigeria, Poland, Ghana, India, who just brought back 100 metric tons from the Bank of England they've held since 1991, Turkey, France, Serbia, Venezuela, Algeria, Cameroon, South Africa, Czechoslovakia. The gold that will be backing the new unit token, 40% of it, and its kilos, redeemable on demand, and the currency that is used to make these unit tokens are all moved into an escrow account taken out of the market, held in an escrow account within the borders of the countries that possess them. They will be independently audited voraciously with huge penalties for not maintaining the integrity of the ecosystem. So they don't have to send their gold to a central location like Moscow or Beijing. Every country that makes their own settlement unit will be held within their own borders. And so all these countries that are bringing back their gold, they understand that if Saudi Arabia is a main participant, full participant, and the BIS is backing it, and they've agreed in principle to it, what it basically means is each country will maintain their own central bank digital currency, each one, and they'll trade with one another over Enbridge for whatever they want to trade for. But if they need to settle in energy and want to use the unit token, it's 40% backed by gold, which is what? The only other tier one asset as defined by who? Oh yeah, the Bank of International Settlements, who's backing Project Enbridge, and who's told all of these banks to bring their gold home, because when gold was reclassified tier one in 2019, in 2017, you had the German Bundesbank, the Bank of the Czech National Bank, Dutch National Bank, Bank of Turkey, Hungary, Poland, Bank of Austria. They all brought their gold home out of nowhere from the Bank of England, the New York Fed. It freaked everyone out. And then the next year in 2018, they bought more gold as a group than they did in the 60 years previously combined. And then in 2019, that number was doubled. And then, oh, by the way, gold's now tier one, says the BIS. So now look at all the central banks. They're buying more than at any time in central bank history. They're all bringing their gold home. BIS is backing Project Enbridge. And guess what? We've agreed in principle to a gold-backed settlement currency traded over Project Enbridge called the unit. And I believe that China and India, who have not told us, in Russia how much gold they have, will try their damnedest to have some form of gold backing to their currency so that it fits into that 60% basket more than anything else. So you're going to have a whole gold-backed ecosystem, with gold being the only other tier one asset replacing dollars and treasuries in their minds, on par with it, that they've all repatriated and brought home, because the unit token will be minted within their own borders and independently audited. You have no need for dollars. You have no need for treasuries. And just like that, the whole system throws up on itself. And if you are not a contrarian, you're doomed. Is that conspiracy? I don't think so. The head of the BRICS New Development Bank, the former president of Brazil, said, we've agreed in principle. Sergei Glaziev has been talking about this for 3 years. All of these countries joining together understand that the Western hegemony is dead. And it is dead when Saudi Arabia didn't re-up the exclusivity. The supremacy is still there, but that's the next domino to fall. And that's why you see all of these institutions who know the playbook standing for delivery and draining the exchanges slowly enough to not raise alarm, but fast enough to be positioned for what comes next.
Yeah. I mean, should we be concerned that obviously the central bank of all central banks is the Bank of International Settlements? And we know
Yes.
that central banks around the world and what they do, they're privately owned and they produce money out of thin air. So basically, they can buy up everything around the world.
Yes.
Certainly looks with what you were saying there that they're strategically positioning themselves to maintain the power that they have had and the control that they have had for centuries now. Would you see it that that is the fact, and do you think that they will?
Absolutely. If
Yeah,
you and your buddies knew in your hometown that you had to accumulate every can of Coca-Cola because there's something's going to happen and each one will be worth $10 million, you're not going to tell everyone you know, this is going to happen. Every one of you would do everything you could to quietly go and buy out every store in the neighborhood and all the surrounding neighborhoods. And then boom, guess what? Coca-Cola is worth a gazillion dollars a can. So yes, that is what they are doing. You can see if you look closely enough, you can see the crumbs they've laid at our feet. You don't have to be a rocket scientist, and that's exactly what will happen. We are on the verge of a new system that will be about commodities and transparency instead of debt instruments, opaque at that, run by a government that is considered hypocritical across the globe, where we can say to Janet Yellen can say to CNN, if Xi gives 1 penny, we're okay with them being friends, by the way, she says, Xi Jinping and Putin, but if she gives 1 penny to the Russian war machine, we will sanction their banks, their companies in Beijing itself. Never mind the fact we've given 260 billion to the Ukraine, Stinger missiles, F-16 jets, and the intelligence on where to drop it with no congressional oversight on any of this, because we're the world reserve currency, and our you know what doesn't stink. That has pissed off the rest of the world, and they've had enough of it. So this is their way of quietly organizing what is a once in a generation, once in a lifetime, once in 500-year pushback against the Western hegemony that goes past the United States to all of the countries of Europe that ruled before us. And this is their chance. So yeah, I think this is as big of a deal as big gets, Chris.
yeah. Now, silver seems to be hovering at this moment in time around $30 per ounce. Do you foresee a value that it will reach where it'll be the breakout point for it to rise rapidly?
I don't know what number that is. I think it will be more of an event-driven deal, but
Yeah,
certainly 30 is a big number, but we broke that and it came back down. So to me, it's less a price and more an event that wakes people up, and it can move so darn quickly it will blow your mind.
yeah. Now, people who are looking to buy silver, and I would recommend Miles Franklin for they can supply to Canada, they can supply to the US. But does Miles Franklin have a minimum order for anybody wanting to buy metals from you?
No, and our website is there, but if there are better prices to be found, if your listeners would email us at info@milesfranklin, info@milesfranklin.com, and ask for our price list. Our price list that is far more competitive than just about anything you'll find in the United States, but we keep that close to the vest. They can ask us any questions that they would like, anything they've heard on this show or others, questions on precious metals IRAs or whatnot, or just request the price list. Info@milesfranklin.com. You'll find it's probably the most competitive price list around. And no, we do not have an order minimum and would love to work with your listeners for sure. Just make sure they put the Atlantic Underground in the subject line so that we understand where this came from.
Yeah.
And we will roll out the red carpet. If you want to be contacted, put your phone number down. One of our brokers who all have very, very prestigious, successful careers before they came here. They're all my oldest friends since elementary school and junior high. 3 or 4 guys worked on Wall Street, graduates from Wharton, master's degree in business administration from Temple. Very, very smart men and women who I consider to be family, who can talk to you about geopolitical events, political events, economics, all the way down to moral and spiritual applications. You name it. We would love to earn your trust, your business, answer your questions, and make sure you get the best price.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, the one thing that concerned me, I looked into obviously some of my investments that I have in stocks and shares. And, for years I thought it was pretty safe until I looked into the fact that the ownership of the stock certificates is now held by a company called Seed and Co., which means in the event of a crash, it's likely that I could lose my pension, my investments, and my shares that I thought were going to.
Counterparty risk.
Yeah,
There's your counterparty risk. This is why gold and silver are so special. They have none. And
yeah,
you're right. And that's The Great Taking by David Rogers Webb. Read it. If you haven't out there, listen to it on YouTube. It's an hour long. It'll curl the hair on your arms. And
yeah,
this is the whole benefit of owning an asset that is not simultaneously someone else's liability. It's called the DTCC, I believe. They hold all of the certificates, not just stocks, but also treasuries. And
yeah.
so everyone thinks that this stuff belongs to you. No, it really doesn't. You are the beneficiary of it, but not the owner of it. And if there is a problem down chain, well, the owner has priority over the beneficiary. You can lose everything. As freaky and stupid as that sounds, it's true.
Yeah.
Watch The Great Taking or read it, David Rogers Webb, and you'll understand exactly what Chris is talking about.
And that's it, and as a protective measure, people who now are listening to this, who have stocks and shares that think, oh, yeah, I didn't realize that. And maybe when they watch The Great Taking, they'll realize how much risk they're in. But can people buy silver and gold as part of their investment portfolios or pension retirement plans? And how does this work?
Yes, absolutely. They would just contact us. We'll put them in contact with one of the handful of the custodians that allow this to happen. It's as simple as rolling over your IRA into a self-directed IRA with one of the custodians in the US that allow for this. And indeed, you can put physical metal into it, held by a depository in the States, fully segregated, with the ability to take possession of the metal, i.e., it is a taxable event, but you could do it. You could actually physically possess the metal as a taxable event through distribution or liquidation. But yes, it is allowed, and it's actually a very vibrant market. We do an awful lot of the precious metals IRAs, and if you control your own pension or the pension administrator would like to do it, no problem at all.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Now, people sometimes fall upon hard times, and it's quite understandable in this current climate that that can happen. Does Miles Franklin buy the precious metals from private individuals as well? Should
Yes,
they sell?
absolutely. We've provided a two-way market for 34 years and always will. We have all the sophisticated machinery to check authenticity if bought from the public. But yeah, we will always provide a two-way market. And I don't think we've ever lost a bid price to anyone. Our bid prices are typically the highest in the industry. So if people want to buy, if they want to sell, we're eager as heck to work with them and happy to do so.
Yeah. Has Miles Franklin or yourself ever considered minting your own silver with
We
the?
do. We actually do. We make 5 ounce, 10 ounce, and kilo bars under the name of the Nordic Mint. We're from Minnesota, up in Nordic country. Yeah, you betcha. Way up there, and just like in the movie Fargo, and um, and we're now going to be making 1 ounce rounds also.
Excellent. That's really good to know. Now, I'm not going to exhaust all the questions I have about silver today because I'd like to come back and talk with you again. But
Love to, Chris. Absolutely, brother. Invite me
yeah,
back anytime.
but before we end today, is there anything that you think people really need to hear today that's very important that we haven't discussed?
I think we've covered a lot of it. I think the most important thing is to trust your gut. Your gut's your best financial advisor.
Yeah,
And look at gold and silver as wealth, wealth that's outlived everything the world's ever thrown at it. And I just think it's never been more important to be a contrarian, or you could damn well end up being a victim. And I will say this: if you are fully invested in dollars, there's a high probability at some point you're destined to go broke.
yeah,
So yeah, that's what I would say. But I would love to pick up where we left off, and I would love to do this with you as often as you would like, because again, my mission is to get as much information out as possible. Everything that I have said is rooted in fact. All of it can be researched. I spend a tremendous amount of time doing that. Always double check and triple check my facts. So yeah, let's do it again. And I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you today. Look forward to doing it again with you real soon.
Yeah, many thanks again. And, please tell everyone where they can follow you and where the best place to buy silver is.
Well, again, it would be info@milesfranklin.com to buy silver, to get our price list, to ask questions, and to contact one of our brokers or have us contact you. Uh, I am starting my own YouTube channel. I have one that's got about 20,000 followers. It's been dormant for 5 years, 4 years. I'm going to start up again next week. Maybe I'll have you on this time.
Yeah.
But if you Google my name, I've done over 4,000 YouTube videos in the last 4.5 years. That's turned into about 20,000 because a lot of people will take my videos like I would do with you, splice it, monetize it on their own channel. So I don't even know half the people that are posting it, but Google my name and you'll find all the videos that I do. I do 10 to 15 or more a week, every week. And it's kind of a labor of love. And I look forward to doing another one with you, hopefully real soon.
Yeah, it'd be incredible. Andy Schectman, this has been an absolute pleasure talking. I'm going to put the links into the description of the podcast below so people can find you. And yeah, I really do look forward to speaking again. The game is changing constantly. And all I can say to people out there is protect yourself. Make sure that you're holding, in my mind, my number one thing is silver that I like to hold. But people need to really protect themselves and make sure that when this goes down, and it will go down again at some point, that they are not left holding worthless cash, or the bank under that bail-in system have taken everything you own to bail themselves out and left you with nothing. And in my eyes, the eradication of that middle class is very, very likely. And people really do need to take into consideration now how they protect themselves for the future moving forward. So thanks again, Andy. This has been absolutely incredible. I look
Pleasure.
forward to speaking to you again, and please keep in touch. I'll send you everything over at the end of the show.
Roger that. Look forward to it as well. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you very much.